Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our summer series of communication in English, interacting with foreigners. Now, let's move on to part 3. Have you already watched part 1 and part 2? Okay, if not, you go and watch that first. When you finish watching part 1 and part 2, then come back here to part 3. How to keep a conversation going. How to keep a conversation going. IFR. What does that mean? And what has that to do with keeping a conversation going? IFR? Anybody? What is it? Anybody has any idea of what IFR mean? Not exactly, eh? So, I'm here to tell you. I inquire. Ask a sincere question. Inquire means ask a sincere question in your conversation in order to keep it going. After you ask a sincere question, then that may or may not be enough. The person who you're interacting with may respond with 1 or 2 sentences and then pause right there. So after that, you need to go to the F. F means follow up. Ask a follow-up question. A follow-up question is asked based on what that person just said. So if you're interacting with an international student or an exchange student, based on what he or she just said, you ask a follow-up question. And asking a follow-up question shows that you are listening, shows that you are paying attention, shows that you want to know more about what he or she is talking about. And the person who is being asked the follow-up question will say, oh yeah, you want to know more, so I'm here to tell you more about what I've just talked about. So it's a very good strategy to keep the conversation going. And after that, what do you do? Inquire, follow up is about asking questions. So it seems like you're asking questions all the time. So R is not about asking questions. Otherwise, the student who you're interacting with feel like, whoa, what? Are you interviewing me? So you need to say something about yourself as well. So R is relate. Share something about you to break up your questions and keep the conversation balanced. That means you're not the only one who asks questions. The student who you're interacting with can also ask questions as well. But how can you promote this question asking technique is to say something about yourself first so that the student will have something to ask you about. All right, so IFR. I inquire. F, follow up. R, relate. And this is the strategy to keep a conversation going. All right, let's see how you're going to apply IFR to the conversation. Do you remember this conversation from part 2? You saw Tina snacking and you don't know exactly what that is. So you ask her. Okay, so that is the conversation that we have in part 2. Now you want to keep the conversation going instead of pausing right then, okay, if you have time for it. But of course, if you don't have time for it, if you're rushing to somewhere else, or if you know that Tina has to go to class, then you won't do anything to lengthen your conversation. But now you have time and you know that Tina also has time, and you find this part of the conversation quite enjoyable for both of you. So you want to keep the conversation going. Okay, so this is the conversation that we had in part 2, if you still remember. So now let's keep the conversation going. So this is the part here. So the first part, when you ask the question, what's that you're eating? This is I inquire. So now you move on to the next step. which is F, follow up. You ask the question, is popular in Mexico? All right, so to show your curiosity of ganso, this is the Mexican snack cake. So this is F, which is follow up. And then Tina say, yep, and it's also my favorite. Cool, right? So this is the strategy to avoid awkward silence if you remember from part 1. How about Taiwanese snacks? Any favorites? So you ask another question to Tina, and that is another follow-up to tie Mexican snacks with Taiwanese snacks. Okay, link them together. You ask a follow-up question. Tina says, I like the strips, the fish strips. Okay, maybe she's not exactly sure the name of it. And it's, oh, the dried fish strips, right? Really? That's the best memory of my childhood. And when you said that, that is the strategy of R, relate. You relate what Tina likes to yourself, which is your childhood memory. Okay, so that is R and IFR. So this is how you lengthen your conversation or to keep a conversation going. Again, you do this if you have time or if the person you're interacting with has time. If both of you are rushing to somewhere else, of course you will not apply this strategy. You will end where the conversation ended in part 2. Okay, let's give this a try to do this conversation together. Okay, we'll take turns. Okay, so the first time you'll be you. You say the lines of you, and then I'll be Tina. Okay, so please. Hi, Judy. How are you? Ganso. It's a Mexican snack cake with strawberry filling and chocolate coating. It's so good. You should definitely try it. Here. Yep, and it's also my favorite. I like the strips, the fish strips. Cool. So we have I, and then we have 2 F's here, and then we have R. So you apply all the strategies to keep a conversation going. Inquire, follow up, relate. Let's switch roles. Now I'll be Tina, and no, I'll be you here in this conversation, and then you'll be Tina. Okay, so I'll start first. Tina, how are things? What's that you're eating? Oh, are you sure? Thank you. It's popular in Mexico? Cool. How about Taiwanese snacks? Any favorites? Oh, the dried fish strips, right? Really? That's the best memory of my childhood. Right? So in this conversation, at the beginning, we only have I, which is inquire, and then we have F, follow up, and then we have another F, follow up, and then the last one is R, relate. And so that is how you keep a conversation going. Inquire, follow up, relate. Right? So we all know what these means. Inquire, ask a sincere question. Follow up, ask a follow-up question, or ask 2 follow-up questions, or ask 3 follow-up questions. But after you ask a lot of questions, make sure you do the last part, which is relate. Otherwise, it will give the impression to the student you're interacting with that you're always asking questions. You need to say something about yourself as well, so that the student knows something about you and will have questions to ask you back. So he or she can also use IFR to speak to you. And then the last one is R, relate. Share something about you to break up your questions and to keep the conversation balanced. I mean, sometimes you're the one who asks questions, sometimes the student is the one who asks questions. Tips for you: be genuinely interested. Do not ask questions for the sake of asking questions. Ask them so that you can get to know someone better. Okay, so a conversation, one of the purposes is to pull yourself closer to each other so you know more about each other. You don't just bump into each other one time. There's another chance or another day, or maybe just later today or next week, you might bump into each other again. So if you have a pleasant conversation this time, then next time when the two of you bump into each other, you want to talk and socialize with each other, right? Right, so now it's time for you to go and practice with your colleagues how to keep a conversation going by applying IFR. I, inquire. F, follow up. R, relate. Right, so please go and practice with your colleagues, IFR. And then when you're finished, then please come back. So this is the end of part 3, how to keep a conversation going. Thank you.